On this week's episode of Inside Outside Innovation, we sit down with Robyn Bolton, author of the new book, Unlocking Innovation. Robyn and I talk about the innovator's journey for unlocking architecture, behaviors, and culture of innovation, and ways you can measure and map your progress. Let's get started. Inside Outside Innovation is the podcast to help new innovators navigate what's next. Each week, we'll give you a front row seat into what it takes to learn, grow, and thrive in today's world of accelerating change and uncertainty. Join us as we explore, engage, and experiment with the best and the brightest innovators, entrepreneurs, and pioneering businesses. It's time to get started. Welcome to another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. I'm your host, Brian Ardinger, and as always, we have another amazing guest. Today we have Robyn Bolton. She is the founder of Mile Zero and author of the new book, Unlocking Innovation, a leader's guide for turning bold ideas into tangible results. Welcome, Robyn.
I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you for coming on the podcast. We've been friends and longtime listeners of the podcast and newsletter from Inside Outside. Should be familiar with some of your work. You came out and spoke at our Inside Outside Innovation Summit in 2022. But since then, you've got a lot of stuff that's happened. So I wanted to have you on the show to talk about your new book that's coming out today and talk about innovation. And maybe a little bit of background on how you began your innovation journey.
So I began my innovation journey purely by luck, straight out of undergrad. After graduating from undergrad, went to work at P&G in brand management and was put on the team that was developing some new cleaning products. And a year after joining the team, we launched Swiffer. So I was part of that kind of amazing journey of corporate innovation and all the experiences and the scars and all of that. And then kind of fast forward a bit, moved up to Boston, got my MBA, did some consulting work in one of the big firms, but then spent almost a decade at the firm that was founded by Clayton Christensen. Nearly a decade immersed in not just disruptive innovation, but all the different types of innovations that companies do and the challenges that companies face. And then since 2018, have been running my own firm, Mile Zero, which has continued to focus on corporate innovation and really supporting the leaders and the teams who are doing that hard work.
You do some great writing in that. If you've followed our newsletter, try to find the best articles every week, disseminate to our audience, and you come up there fairly regularly. Stuff that
I am always quite honored.
Let's talk about writing. So you have a new book out called Unlocking Innovation. What made you decide to write another book on innovation? And what is the secret nugget that you wanted to talk to your audience about?
So I resisted writing a book for a long time because it's like the last thing this world needs is another book on innovation. But eventually I broke through my own resistance because, in reflecting on my career in innovation, I realized that hey, the innovator's dilemma came out in the late 90s. And in the 30 years since that happened, the result, the success rate of corporate innovation has not changed.
Exactly.
And all that's changed in 30 years is we've kind of had this innovation industrial complex get created of consultants, guilty, books, now guilty, articles, all this stuff that's grown up, but it hasn't changed the success rate. And I got curious as to why that is. And I think it is because, and this is what the book focuses on, is that we've tended to take a really siloed approach to innovation. We come in and you need this team structure, or you need this process or this governance, or on the other end of things, we need to build a culture of innovation. And the reality is you have to take a much more holistic approach, which I call the ABCs, that you need to have the architecture of innovation, so the process, structure, strategies. It's necessary, but not sufficient for success. You also need to be really focused on leadership behaviors and how leaders are interacting with innovation teams, how they're supporting innovation. And you need a culture that, at least at the very beginning, isn't resistant to innovation. So you need to be working on all three of these things, all of the ABCs, all at the same time, but in different ways as the team progresses.
I think one of the challenges you find with that is oftentimes one or two people have been given the mantle of the person who has to figure that out. And it's very difficult as a director of innovation or whatever you want to call those folks to be able to move that battleship in the right direction a lot of times.
Yes, absolutely. And it gets even harder when, you look at the research, and I think it's something like 90% of innovation teams get shut down within 3 years. Yeah. So you're tasked with moving a battleship or an aircraft in 3 years. And, we all know that 3 years doesn't mean you actually have 3 years to produce results. You have to produce results really in 2 years so that you're able to keep working in year 3 before you get shut down. So it's this crazy short period of time that you have to produce results, and you're working on something that is really a long-term investment. So you have all of these contradictions that, as someone who's in charge of innovation, you've got to grapple with.
Well, and I think the biggest challenge is the fact a lot of folks don't really understand how difficult that exploration process is to find a winner, quote unquote. In your book, you mentioned a stat, something like 1 in 50,000 incubated ideas ever reach $1 million in sales. And so you think about those types of odds and the types of shots on goal you have to consistently make to explore through that maze of crazy new bad ideas to find one or two that actually starts getting traction and making it.
Yeah, exactly. When you think of, okay, I need to incubate 50,000 ideas to get one that makes $1 million. And oh, by the way, the resources allocated to innovation are usually like 2 people and $10.
Yeah.
So the odds are very much stacked against you. But I also know, you and I both know as innovators, like that doesn't deter you. You see the potential and you're like, no, we can figure this out. We can do this. And so this book is very much written for those folks who are the rebels, the realists, and the fixers who are like, no. We see the potential. We can do this. We're going to give it a shot.
We talk a lot about finding the curious and the restless within your organization that have more of the tool sets, skill sets, mindsets around innovation, knowing full well that most people aren't going to have those particular skills. But having said that, my thesis, at least, is that we should be teaching these skills to everybody, whether they become a founder or a person on an innovation team. These tools and the things that you learn by innovating can help you in your day-to-day job, regardless if you're spinning up a brand new $1 million idea.
Yeah, absolutely. The curiosity, the critical thinking, the kind of creativity with, I'll say a lowercase c, because everybody's like, oh, I'm not creative. It's like, okay, you don't have to be Picasso to be creative.
Right.
So yeah, the skills are absolutely transferable, but so often I see companies kind of say like, everyone's an innovator. And it's like, yeah, everyone can be. Everyone can learn to be, but not everyone wants to be. And so for those folks who love to be the operators, who love to be the experts and just like hone in on doing something amazingly well, let them, love them for it. And the folks who are the curious and the restless, like you said, teach them, empower them, and help, train those skills and mindsets.
You talk about in the book that you argue that innovation is not an idea problem, but a leadership problem. Can you unpack that a little bit?
Every organization is full of people, and people are full of ideas. And so there's never a shortage of ideas in an organization. As a leader, as an executive, you may not be hearing ideas. That doesn't mean that people don't have them. You may be hearing ideas and they're not big enough or they're not on strategy. Again, as a leader, that falls on you to help people figure out what ideas you are most meaningful. That's kind of where you get idea challenges. But overall, the reason I say that innovation isn't an idea problem, it's a leadership problem, is because leaders are ultimately the ones making the decisions, especially around resources. And, how many people do we allocate to something, how much budget? And you can tell an organization's priorities by how they allocate their resources. And so when you say innovation is a strategic priority, and I tell the story in the book of we need $250 million from new businesses in the next 2 years, and then you put 2 people and $10 to it, people in the organization see that gap and you're not walking the talk.
Let's unpack the book a little bit. One of the interesting things I like about it is you do talk about this year 1, year 2, year 3 process or journey that folks should go through. So what are some of the pitfalls or things that you're going to encounter as you're trying to spin up some of this stuff? And what are some of the ways that people can navigate that?
Year 1 is great. Everyone's enthusiastic. Everyone's on board. And that is when you can get stretched too far. So one of the first things to do in year 1 is to figure out what is in and out of bounds for the innovation work you do. And that is both along things like what projects do you work on, how do you work with other parts of the organization, but then you personally as a leader of innovation, what do you want to work on? And what don't you want to work on? And where's their flex there? Because you're going to need to stay motivated and positive and excited throughout this 3-year journey. So easier to do that if you're working on things you're passionate about. You also need to, and I know a lot of people will not love what I'm about to say, you need to put a dollar amount on what innovation is going to deliver. Ultimately, it's about dollars and cents. You need to have metrics that other people in the organization can look at and can measure your progress against. And, I talk about figuring out the growth gap, figuring out what that revenue is that innovation needs to deliver because the organization doesn't have line of sight to filling that growth gap.
Let me pick on that a little bit, just from the standpoint of how do you know, especially when you're launching a brand new, I guess it depends on what type of innovation and how close is it to the core versus adjacent or transformational. And that at the early stages, you're probably going to be guessing. And so is your recommendation that the innovation leader should guess to match the needs of the leadership folks and figure out as they get there? Or how do you balance the fact that the truth is truly unknown, whether we're going to be able to make this particular idea a $1 million idea?
Yeah. So it's actually starting at the end and working backwards. So I tell the story in the book of an organization I worked with that they're like, oh, we've got this innovation thing figured out. We're fine. We don't need to make big investments. And we did this very simple math problem where I said, okay, you've promised X to the street and that you'll deliver this revenue in 5 years. Let's take a look at your strat plan. What do you have line of sight to? And, we found a many, many, many $1 million gap between those two numbers. And honestly, the organization looked at it and they're like, yeah, no, we're fine. We can totally fill that with our innovation portfolio. And then I'm like, well, that's the equivalent of 2 Facebooks.
Right.
So are you going to build 2 Facebooks in 5 years? And like, wow, that's impressive. And that then opened up everything within the organization. Resources started coming, and we still didn't know what we were going to work on. We still didn't have projects, but suddenly there was a sense of urgency and commitment that hadn't been there before. Innovation was kind of a hobby versus a true financial and strategic priority. So even doing that kind of simple exercise, like, it changes the way key stakeholders perceive innovation and make it critically important. And then you can get into the discussion around, do we have the right portfolio, especially because different types of innovation, start earning revenue at different time periods. But just kind of getting that single call to action is huge.
Talk about some of the metrics or KPIs that you suggest that teams should be looking at early on, rather than just strictly, dollars and cents of profit and that. How can you start measuring if you're on the right path?
I think of it in 2 buckets. There's activity metrics and impact metrics. And early on, activity metrics are easiest, right? You can say, like, we've got this many new ideas, we're incubating this many ideas. And those are really important to have, especially, year 1, year 2, because you're not going to have revenue metrics or order metrics or anything like that, certainly until year 3 at the earliest. Year 2, though, when you need to be showing results, is where you need to get, I say, a little creative. Of, yes, you're still showing the activity metrics, but you need to also be showing impact metrics around kind of how you're helping the organization. So, your team unearthed insights that you were able to hand off to an existing, kind of say, brand team, and the brand team was able to use that to create something. So finding ways to show impact, at least internally in the second year, that you can then kind of, through a few hops, tie to revenue, is really, really critical to making sure you survive the full 3 years.
A lot has changed in the innovation space, like you said, over the last 30 years. A lot of people know all sorts of new frameworks from lean startup and design thinking, everything else that's come through that. In your years of developing a new product like a Swiffer, what would you do with today's knowledge that you could apply to the next Swiffer that you'd be developing?
So probably the biggest thing that I would apply to the next big, $1 billion idea is the experimentation, kind of along the lines of lean startup. I think, when I was working on Swiffer a long time ago, design thinking didn't have a name yet, but that's what we were doing. We were spending a lot of times with consumers, talking to them, testing with them, getting their feedback. What has changed and what I would do differently is the way we tested Swiffer was in a test market. We're like, literally, we launched it into Cedar Rapids, Iowa, and Pittsfield, Massachusetts. And thank goodness those test markets went well, because if they didn't, we wouldn't have been able to figure out what was the root cause of the problem. So, tools like Lean Startup, like Rita McGrath's discovery-driven planning, kind of running those experiments, what I like to call the scientific method applied to business, I would do that first before going into the full-on test market.
How do you see new tools like AI is a hot topic, and I've seen a lot more people trying to use AI in the innovation space per se. What have you seen out there, and what are your thoughts around that topic?
Yeah, so AI, I'm a big fan with all the caveats of you got to double check it. But like I have actively used it in consumer research and creating personas, consumer journeys, all of that discovery work. Big fan there. I've seen a lot of companies start using it in kind of design sprints to come up with ideas, name ideas, come up with example logos. And it absolutely can speed things forward, which is great, especially if you have to create 50,000 ideas to incubate. But we can't forget that AI can only tell you what's already known. So it's great for core innovation. It can be really helpful for adjacent innovation. If you're looking at radical or breakthrough innovation, AI is not your answer, because you have to create that. You have to come up with the idea. This kind of gets back to one of the things that's really important, is having different types of innovation and kind of knowing which tool to apply. Because if you want to use AI to create the next world-changing thing, you're going to be very disappointed.
Yeah, I agree. What I've seen obviously is getting better, but I think the challenge is making sure that people understand the power of it, but not getting too tied into the immediate impact that it's going to have. Like, it's a tool. It's like a tool, like a spreadsheet. Back in the day, spreadsheets were amazing. Are they going to change the world? We don't know yet, but continue to use it and play with it and see what happens with it.
Yeah, I mean, the fact is, innovation is all about solving problems for humans.
Yeah.
And so humans have to be involved. And like you said, AI is a tool, but that's all it is.
What are some of the counterintuitive pieces of innovation advice that you've either received or given or come upon as you've written this book?
Oh, that's a great question. Certainly counterintuitive is you have to have results quickly, because that's, again, in direct opposition to the idea of innovation as a long-term investment. Certainly that you shouldn't try to make everyone an innovator. Let people be who they are and support the folks who want to innovate. And I think also this kind of the main thesis of the book is that innovation success rises and falls on leaders. You can have the most brilliant idea, and I tell this story. This is the story of Victor in the book, of having this wildly successful idea that, because kind of one simulation said it was going to fail, it almost got killed. Leaders really do affect everything. And if you don't have the right mindset as a leader, if you don't have the commitment, the courage, the patience, and the understanding, the leaders are the ones who end up killing the ideas. And for very good reason. I don't mean to be hating on leaders. Like, I totally get why they're making these decisions, because they're logical. It's like, you get incentivized for delivering this year. Innovation isn't going to deliver this year. So why would you invest in something that feels like a crapshoot versus a certain thing? And so that's why there's real tension, and that's why it's about leaders, not ideas.
Well, and that's why I like the process that you talk about. It's about experimentation and collecting that evidence along the way, so that you have a better thesis or a better reason to continue that particular journey of innovation, so that it doesn't have to be, well, I think your idea is great, so I'm going to fund it, or I think your idea is bad and I'm not going to fund it. The more we can get into helping people understand what they're doing and what they're de-risking and how they're de-risking it, and have evidence to back that up, better chance they have to move those ideas forward.
Yep. And figuring out what the evidence needed is up front. One of my favorite quotes that I heard from a client was, what do you need to see in order to say yes? And asking that question early in the process versus later.
Right. And being off track when you don't have a lot of chance to pivot or change. Well, this has been a great conversation. I love having you on the show. If people want to find out more about yourself or the book, what's the best way to do that?
Certainly LinkedIn. is always the easy way, Robyn and Bolton. To learn more about the book, you can go to unlockinginnovation.co and you can download a free sample of the book, kind of get that free first chapter, give it a read, and then go from there.
Excellent. I encourage everybody to grab a copy. It's great. I love everything you do, Robyn. Thanks for being on Inside Outside Innovation, and looking forward to continuing the conversation in the future.
Thank you. Absolutely.
That's it for another episode of Inside Outside Innovation. If you want to learn more about our team, our content, our services, check out insideoutside.io or follow us on Twitter at the IO Podcast or at Ardinger. Until next time, go out and innovate.